Hey, it's Paul Banis with GreatDad.com, and I'm here with my weekly series of conversations with dads and experts on dads on modern fatherhood today. And this is a conversation today that's very close to my heart because I'm kind of going through some of the issues that we're going to be talking about. But I've got Jack Stoltzfus, you may have to correct me on that, with me today. Jack is a PhD psychologist. He's also a coach, and his specialty is really working with parents who have teenagers and trying to motivate them and try to figure out how to press their buttons, how to avoid the trauma of this whole period of where they're transitioning into letting go. So welcome, Jack.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me, Paul. Appreciate it.
But you deal with the whole spectrum of adolescence all the way through young adult children?
Yes. Yeah. So I view my my work mainly in the 18 to 29-year-old period. So
Okay.
late adolescent into late 20s. That's kind of what we're generally referring to as young adulthood these days. So
Do some of the issues that we'll talk about in terms of launching your kids, do those appear earlier on so that parents should be aware of potential warning signs, or is this really something that sometimes appears after the structured world of high school, college is over?
well, I think it can happen both ways, but typically what happens are that adolescents generally are trying to push for more independence, trying to establish their own identity, maybe, in relationships with significant others. And the parents need to make the adjustment to be able to allow for and support those processes. And they start in earlier adolescence and then continue on. So if parents don't make the shift from controlling and directing to more of a consulting and coaching role, there can be problems there. There can be a lot of contention and resistance. So
Yeah, I think it's a shock for some parents who see this happening in adolescence and don't know about this shift or don't know that they need to make this shift. How what is, I guess, what is the challenge of parents who are that blinded by what was, and then how, so for some, how suddenly that changes? I mean, for a lot of us, it's one day your daughter's sitting there eating, dinner and spending the evening playing board games, and the next day she's like, I'm up to my room, see you tomorrow.
yeah, well, I had one father, ex-Marine, leadership in the Marines Corps, came home and I think had kind of a Marine mentality, which is chain of command, respect your leadership, and started getting pushback from his son. And I think rather than saying, okay, I need to shift here and do more listening and trying to partner with him, this person tried to exert more force on the son, and it really went badly for the whole relationship. So, I mean, that's an example of more of somebody had a kind of a extreme control and command kind of mindset as a parent and had difficulty making that kind of adjustment. It's pretty normal to see teenagers starting to spend more time in the room, more time with friends. Parents may get a little bit nervous about that.
Right.
What are you doing in your room all day long or all night? And now with social media, they're connected, they're wired all the time. So I kind of say to parents, they need to get up to speed on social media too, and maybe be able to do some communication with their teenagers and young adults along the lines of what they prefer. Maybe it's texting, type of thing. So some parents don't want to do that, but if you want to talk to your kid, you may need to do that.
Yeah. Yeah. When you end up with parents who have kids in that 18, 29-year range, are there things you like at least think in your mind, like, man, I wish this person or this couple had done, X? What would they have done differently to not be sitting in your office trying to figure it out at that stage?
Well, I mean, it's when parents of an 18 to 29-year-old are concerned because the person's not moving ahead, there's a tendency to kind of think, well, what have we done wrong?
Right.
Where did we go wrong? And I don't know that's either always the case or many times the case that there was something that they did or didn't do that triggered this kind of problem. So I'm
Thank you
not
for that.
sure how helpful that is, and parents, I always say parents are the guiltiest segment of our population already, so I always have this image of a conference for, parents of perfect parents conference, and you open the door and there's nobody there
Yeah, yeah,
because nobody's going to meet that
yeah, right,
criteria.
right, right.
So, I think it's trying to make this kind of adjustment as they're getting older. If you don't make that adjustment, if you don't try to be more of a partner, and I'm not talking about being a friend in this sense, because you still have to be able to kind of set some expectations and boundaries and all, but to begin to open up, allowing more time away, making the change in the hours they can be gone, and just generally opening up the freedom for that young adult. If they don't do that, that's when you can get into some problems. So,
Yeah, well, you're a trained coach as well. And I think the great thing about coaching, which you probably learned also through your therapy training and in psychology, but the great thing for non-psychologists is learning more how to ask more open-ended questions and play more of this role of a coach rather than as a director, boss. You do this, that's bad, all the rest.
yeah, absolutely. I think that when I do these workshops with parents, I'm amazed at the one of the skills that I work with on is listening skills and how much they kind of grasp that. Well, this is so good. It's like, yeah, hey, this is what you need to do. That's part of the change is being able to listen more and ask questions to understand the young adult better. I use a method that I've learned from Coach Marshall Goldsmith with parents, and that is to ask parents to ask for feedback and feed forward.
Hmm.
Feedback is tell me one or two things that I'm doing that's really helpful to you. And, the parent writes those things down. And then with the young adult to say, give me some feed forward, two or three things I could do to be a more effective dad or more effective mom. And that draws the young adult in to giving feedback to the parent. I mean, who better to ask how to be a better parent than the people you're trying to parent, you know? And then,
That takes a lot of courage.
yeah, yeah, and then the parent has to follow through on that. Okay, I maybe can't do all three suggestions, but I'll do this one or these two, and I'll check in with you to be sure that you believe I'm coming through on these particular suggestions that you made. It can be very valuable in the relationship with the young adult.
Well, let me ask you a question that I maybe would back to like who's the fault or the responsibility that may let some people off the hook, because I think a lot of us deal with this situation where you do run into a snag where whenever it happens in adolescence or later on, like 1829, when there are challenges for them,
Mhm.
is man, I should have been harder on them. I should have forced them to do this. I was not strong enough. I was not demanding enough.
Mhm.
And I guess my reaction is that's probably a wrong way to think about it. But I know that is the temptation. We usually, there are all kinds of things in parenting where you say, maybe I should be, harder than I am. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the research on parenting and perceptions of parents these days is that there tend to be more lax than more controlling.
Mhm.
The negative kind of perception of young adults these days is that they're entitled.
Right,
And I say, if they're entitled, who entitled them?
right,
You know, that goes back to the parents. So
right.
I've had more parents say, maybe we shouldn't have kind of given in so much or kind of overindulge. Sometimes it's just the indulgence of
Mm.
things to the point where, okay, I should be getting a car now. I should be getting this or that because the parents have overindulged in material things and then creates that kind of expectation that now that I'm 22 or something, you should still be taking care of me and again and giving me a roof over my head and food and everything like that. So,
Well, maybe that's an important distinction is I guess in my own personal philosophy, I don't think you can give a child enough love and support and positive. I mean, yeah, I guess you could if you're rational. I mean, you certainly
yeah.
could lie to them, but that they need as much as that as they can to develop a storehouse, because the world's going to teach them hard lessons anyway. But you're
Yeah.
talking about the risk of overindulging them, not with emotions and feelings and affection, but with material
Yeah.
goods that take the place of that support.
Yeah, certainly. I'm not talking about one of the foundational practices that I teach parents who are working on letting go of the young adults is the communication of unconditional love. No matter what, I'm always there for you emotionally, and that I love you no matter what your behavior is. So I think that's so foundational, and I don't think you can overdo that or oversay it. And sometimes parents don't tell their kids they love them after they get to a certain age, and I think that can create some insecurity on the part of the young adult, especially if they have problems or they get into trouble or there's a contentious relationship with the parent. That can really be a problem where the young adult starts to wonder, does this parent really love me? Do you really care about me?
Yeah, yeah.
There's
Especially,
a,
go ahead.
I was going to say, a great story. I worked at Wilder Child Guidance Clinic in St. Paul years ago, and a colleague of mine came to tell me the story of a therapy session she was in with a father, kind of a big burly father, and this young adult, teenager, late teenager, who had gotten involved in some delinquent behavior and all, and the courts had required family counseling. So the father's sitting there with the son, not real happy about having to go through this counseling. And the son's head's hanging down and things are quiet for a minute. And the son said, would you really cry if something happened to me, if I died? And his father said, there are not enough buckets in the world to hold the tears I'd cry for you if something happened to you. And what emotional moment. Isn't that something that everybody wants to hear and every father should tell their kids, that there's not enough buckets in the world to hold the tears I'd cry if something happened to you. So it's a great story about how important that is, how important that message is.
Yeah, well, the thing I pull out of that is I'd rather have, the drops of tears every day than the bucket at the end. I mean,
Yeah.
that's the thing, is that the love that needs to be shown everywhere you can.
Yeah, and I think in this case it was a question. The kid was questioning.
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
in trouble. Do you still love me?
right.
Kind of thing. So
Well, I think that leads, I guess, into this period of 18 to 29. I know there are a lot of people out there who want their kids to go to Harvard, Yale, whatever it is. And in a lot of families, there's disappointment. There's, if not overt disappointment, there's been this conversation of, oh, we're gonna get you into Harvard all this time, and then they succeed somewhere else, but they don't go to that school.
yeah.
And it sets up a dynamic, maybe kind of under the radar, that the child already isn't good enough. Do you see that a lot in this issue?
Well, I think that I talk to parents about the letting go process, and part of the letting go process is the letting go of your vision of who this person is and who this person's going to become and what they're going to do. And that's hard for parents because from early on, they may be planning. I've got an idea from a 2-year-old or 3-year-old. He's very smart. He's going to be going here or there, and they get caught up in that vision. And that's part of a grieving process to some extent, to say, you got to let go of that and let this person be the person that they want to be, and you can't kind of push them into your vision and your image of who they should be, who they should become. Because you'll get some real pushback on that, obviously. So
Well, not just pushback, but I think there's that ongoing feeling of less than, less
yeah,
that and
yeah,
your point about do you really love me? Do you only love me if I am a star football player? You only love me if I've got a
yeah.
Harvard degree, which is painful for anybody. I mean, it goes for any relationship.
Oh yeah. I think that I see a problem more with dads than with moms, of young adults never feeling like they pleased their dad or
Yeah.
lived up to what their dad expected of them. And it's really a shame. I think historically, I had one of my mentors along the way talked about historically, mothers teach kids about unconditional love, dads teach kids about conditional love. There's no free lunch out there. Now, women are more involved in the workforce, moms are. And so I think both parents have to teach both of those messages. Yeah, we love you, and that's part of what you can always count on, but the world doesn't operate that way. And there are consequences to your behavior, and you need to be responsible too. So,
Okay. What do you think of? I've read that recently a lot of people are questioning the whole idea of what our generation did, which is to say, I don't care, or some of us anyway, I don't care what you do with your life and whatever, just so you're happy and you
yeah.
create a life where you're happy. Do you think that was the wrong message or the wrong framing? Because I think now there's a question like, did that teach them to be motivated to at least, pay the rent and feed themselves?
I think that, yeah, it could be sending a message that's too narrow in terms of, just that you feel good and feel happy, because that just, that may not be the case. And I think, unfortunately, over the generations, starting with kind of our generation, boomer generation, I'm assuming you're a boomer, right?
Yeah.
We've shifted more investment in our kids' happiness and success than past generations. Past generations, it was kind of I raised you 18, I'm done
Right.
now. You're on your own.
Yeah.
But now, because we've invested so much more in the success and happiness of our kids, if they're not happy at 19, 20, 23, 25, we're not feeling happy about ourselves. We take it personally. It's something wrong with us. What did we do wrong? So I think we've erred in putting too much investment ourselves in their happiness and the success of our kids, that then we get tied into that. And that's where we can end up feeling, guilt and loss and sadness and stuff.
Well, what is the counterpoint to that then? I mean, if we've gone too far in the happiness part, what should we have been doing? What messages should we have been tempering that with?
Well, I think that, I always talk about kind of love and backbone, that parents need to be able to deliver both those.
So that's resilience.
Yeah. So the backbone message really is teaching early on about being responsible, telling the truth, teaching values to kids, seeing keeping promises, teaching them those types of things early on, so they develop that kind of set of values and core kind of values that they need. And I think we've erred in also the process of being more invested in their happiness, and particularly in their happiness, we have not held them as responsible as we could, and therefore they haven't developed a certain grit or a certain kind of resilience that they need. Because we've kind of said, oh, it didn't go well, that's fine. You didn't follow through on this, oh, that's fine. And so if they don't experience the consequences, and sometimes parents will intervene in what consequences they should be experiencing, and that doesn't help them to develop this kind of resilience and grit that I think they really need. So it's really, you've got to be able to deliver both of those messages. I love you, and you have to be responsible. You have to meet certain responsibilities in life. So
Yeah, so I guess that's the question. So then in this 18-29-year-old period, maybe I guess I'm more interested in the after college, but it could be any time when they're launching. Could be an 18-year-old finishing high school and not going to college and doing something else. How long should parents wait before they start getting worried? I mean, or are there warning signs? I guess if you had a child who gets out in the middle of the recession, as I did when I got out of college, it may take you 9 months to get a job. So do you start getting forceful with them before they even have had a chance? Or you look more for warning signs of playing video games all day long and not even making an effort?
yeah, well, I always talk to parents that patience is one of the key virtues to this period of time, for parents to have patience, that it's taking longer for kids to launch these days. I mean, that, young adults, 20-year-olds change jobs 7 times typically on average. Now they're not getting married until males are getting married first time at age 30, females at 29. That's a good thing as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah.
And most parents should celebrate that.
Yeah.
They're getting their heads together, figuring out who they are, maybe getting their career established, and then they get married, rather than our generation, past generation, getting married early and not not knowing who we are and what we really want in life. So that's a good thing to think about some of the positive aspects of this taking longer to launch, and parents typically they're okay at 18, 19, 20, 21. But when it's 26 or 27, the alarm bells are going off and the kid is still living at home in the basement or whatever. So, but having some patience, recognizing that it's tougher right now to economically in particular, just to rent an apartment.
Sure. Well, that's a
It's out of
difference.
reach for people.
Right.
And how do you save money for a house if you're paying 20? I have a couple of young adults are paying 2,400 a month for an apartment,
Right.
and that's a more big
Right.
mortgage payment. How do they save for a house? So I think it's important for parents to understand that there are economic pressures and constraints these days that are affecting kids, and it may take a little longer for them to get to that kind of self-sufficient, responsible independence.
Well, is there a difference also in terms of their development time? I think we all, as parents, we all kind of benchmark against the kids we hear about, the ones who did go to Harvard, who did win a
Sure.
Nobel. It's always we always are saying like, what do we consider normal? So if our child is progressing or developing to that level of responsibility at maybe a slightly different time, they're kind of in the clouds. Maybe I've got a son who's a philosophy major. That wouldn't be considered like a real vocational path. But is that, I don't see him as somebody who's not, progressing or not evolving, but he has not yet started to think about what does he do with that afterwards. So I guess my question is like, how do you know the difference between not being eventually motivated and still kind of getting used to the idea that you've got to take care of yourself at some point?
Yeah, I think that parents can, when I talk with parents, I say there are some non-negotiable rules if you're living at home. You
Okay.
know, no drugs, no stealing, no threats of violence, those things. But one of them is you got to be either working or going to school or you're going to be volunteering. So I think getting them to do something right away. You can't just sit at home and do nothing. That's not option four. So you got to make some choice here if you're going to be living at home. And basically, I tend to say work or going to school. But if for whatever reason can't get work, they can't get in school or something, well, then get out of the house. You're going to volunteer. You're going to do something at this point. So I think that gets them started particularly if they get a part-time job. Okay, they make some money. Oh, that starts them on the process of learning how to kind of pay for some of their expenses and begin that process of being more responsible around, their income and taking care of themselves. That hopefully you can kind of build on that. Sometimes I'm a big believer in the concept, the skip year concept. I have seen too many parents with young adults go to college and bomb out in the first semester because they didn't really know why they were going. The parents wanted them to go, all their friends were going, and they went. And typically, the typical pattern is they get behind in the first month and then they give up. I can't catch up. And then they just kind of party and sit in the dorm room and they don't tell their parents. And then the bill comes at the end. Why didn't you tell me you weren't going? Well, I was too embarrassed or too ashamed to do that. So I said, for those kids, take a year off, do some work, maybe do some travel or something. Try to get clear about what you might want to do with your life. Not everybody just has to go off to college because all my friends are going to college. So
Sure. I love the gap year now looking back. It's harder to see that as not a real option, you know, when they're a little bit younger and they're making the transition. If we're recording this in May, so a lot of kids are just getting out of school now, just graduating. How long would you wait when they're, to say, hey, you need to at least get a job? Or if they're working like full time trying to find a job, you give them grace and say, that's okay. You can take 6 months and you put all your energy into finding a job versus getting a part-time job. How do you navigate that?
well, I think it depends on kind of what they want to do. If they're kind of thinking I'm going to college in the fall and they really want to do that, and maybe they even have an idea of what they might want to major in and what kind of career they might pursue. then they need to be working because they ought to be chipping in on the college expenses and everything. If they're saying, I don't want to go to college, I'm not, and I've got somebody that's in that situation now where I want to spend a year, a gap year, and do some other things. I may do some travel or whatever. Okay, well, then you're going to need some money to travel. If you're going to travel, we're not going to just fund that as parents. So get a job, then take some time off. You maybe work for 6 months and then you do some travel or whatever. But trying to kind of, as best you can as a parent, try to understand, how ready are they for college? How committed are they to that? Or is it better that they just work for a year, maybe, and get some money together and then start to figure out what they'd really like to do and why, and find the reasons for going to college, not just because their friends are, or my parents went to college, I should go to college. So,
And how about after the college degree when there's a lot more of really a focus on launching?
yeah, I think there's still some resistance on the part of college grads to take jobs that are not in my major, and that was really, I saw that a lot during COVID. No, I don't want to do that job. It's not in my major field. So I think at some point parents have to say, well, take a job that you need to get a job. So you're getting some income. See if you can get something that you could put on your resume that might link to the kind of career that you want. Maybe you're not quite there in terms of a marketing job right away, if that was your degree, but get into sales, do some sales, and that'll help you in your resume and getting into a marketing job at some point. So you just can't go from your college degree into your ideal job right off the bat. So
Right. Yeah, you can't become manager before you're assistant manager or admin.
yeah.
I think there is that process too of that. The part of the shift into adulthood is letting go of the fantasies and the romanticization of life that a lot of people held. I was a French major, so I absolutely know what it's like to not be focused at all on the real world. But when is dropping that in the same way, you have to get over a lot of romanticization of the perfect partner, the perfect spouse, the house, the perfect city, and all these things that we kind of think that there is a perfect thing out there, and somehow communicating to them that's not necessarily possible on the first go, that you're
Yeah.
not going to find that first thing. But it's a hard message to explain to them since they kind of know what they want. They're afraid of making a wrong choice sometimes.
Oh, yeah, I think that's true. I mean, adolescence and young adulthood is a period of recognizing you can't do everything and you have to kind of keep narrowing and narrowing your decisions going forward. You can't do 5 different careers. And so that reality sets in, I think, for young adults, whether they're coming out of high school or coming out of college, that I've got to make some choices at this point, which will eliminate other choices. Now I think there's some good benefit in this changing of jobs that they do because they get clear about what they really like to do. And, for millennials, the first generation where work ethic was not in the top 5 values of that generation, but work balance has come up. And I'm not so sure they're not a little smarter than us and saying, I'm just not going to kill myself in my job. I'm going to get some balance in my job. And some of them are changing jobs. Well, I didn't get enough flex time in this job, or I want to be work remotely more. So they're making those decisions at times too.
Yeah.
I had one parent tell me that he hired this young woman at probably a millennial, because this was a time ago. And she came in after the first week and said, now from 1 o'clock to 2:30, I'm going to go to my yoga class. But I'm going to come back 5 and I'll work later in the evening. But it wasn't a request. It was like, yeah, I'm going to my yoga class in the middle of the day. It's just flabbergasted. Would somebody do that 20 or 30 years ago?
Yeah,
No
no,
way.
I manage people like that, and it freaked. Yeah, I flabbergasted myself.
Yeah. Well, a lot of us who have lived in a whole different era go, what?
Yeah, or you knock on the door politely and say, "Please, excuse me, sir, could I?" So I think of some of this problem of opening up this communication and this trying to help them out is related to this problem that you and I talked about a little bit before we started, is the disaffectation of kids, and the fear that you're going to somehow say something, do something at this transitional time that's going to push them away irrevocably. And as you and I both said, we both have had a fairly large number of clients who are going through this right now, where they've lost touch with their kids for whatever reason, through a divorce or just through some moment where the child steps away from the family and says, I'm not coming back. I don't need this. And I mean, that would be the ultimate worry. I mean, I don't know what I would do if, that's like death to most parents. So the Pew Research study shows this. A bunch of other studies show this, this is happening in families. Like 1/4 of families are experiencing this disaffection for some period of time. And it's very confusing. Is this a new thing, or is this something that's been going on for?
Well, that's a good question, because I've seen the same research, 1 out of 4, and 1 out of 10 maybe don't communicate ever again. I mean, there's some that just go off the radar and that's it. Most of them do at some point, the research seems to say, come back. But for at least on average a 4-month period, they may go silent and not communicate with the parents. Sometimes the breakdown is around the transition period, because maybe there's more control or just unresolved conflicts that occur, that don't get resolved. My goal in working with parents to help them with the transition process is to help them help the young adult get on the path to self-sufficiency, independence, and success and happiness, while maintaining a positive relationship with the parent. So not at the expense of that relationship with the parent. Because if these people end up going through this estrangement or alienation process, both parties suffer. The parents suffer, the young adult suffers too. They're not in a healthy place if they're out there and they're angry and they're not talking with the parents, and that's going to affect their other relationships in ways too, in negative ways. And the parents are suffering, obviously, in terms of hurt and pain about that too. So
I think the thing, at least in my clients, and I only get one side of the story, so I don't know what the background is, but in almost all the cases, the dad has said, I don't even understand where this came from. I was always present. I went, I coached her soccer games. I was there for every event. We tried to be as loving as we could. I'm a psychologist, or, I know what I'm doing. I can't even see where this comes from. And it's a lot of confusion. I mean, in some cases, there's been abuse, there's been alcoholism, there's been all kinds of things, and you can logically understand it. But in some of these cases, it's like, I don't get it. Do you see that as well?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. One case of a mother and a daughter, very close, growing up, and went to the wedding and everything was fine. And then shortly after that, 6 months later, gets a letter from the daughter saying, we have decided not to have any contact with our parents, that we want to raise our family or do our thing without any involvement with the parents, and just cut things off. I mean, this mother was just in shock. What have I done? We've had a good relationship and all. So and even went down and to visit this daughter, and she wouldn't open the door. Said, go away. We're not going to let you in. The mother and the father were down there. So how painful is that, to have somebody that is alive and you can't have a relationship with? Almost worse than if they had died, because they're alive but choosing not to have this relationship with you. So it's a huge problem. And I mentioned this book by Josh Coleman, Rules of Estrangement, is really a great book that people should kind of take a look at if facing that kind of situation. He's got a website, joshcoleman.com or something too.
Yeah, I'm fascinated by this. What I tell dads in this situation, I'm not usually giving advice, but I guess I ask the question, like, are you ready? Are you prepared to be patient and wait and be true to your values? If your value is loyalty and being a good father, that means being a good father until the end. And just because they've given up, if you want to be true to your values, you keep on keeping on. Is that the best they can hope for in some cases?
Yeah, I mean, I say you never stop loving your kids. You were wired into that. So you send them a card at times. You keep reaching out to them. I don't think you should stop doing that. A Christmas card, a birthday card, a present, even though they're cutting off communication. It just says, I'm still here. I still love you. I still want this relationship with you. So I think that parents ought not to cut that off either. So
Yeah, I think that's part of of who you, if you've established that it's who you are, not keeping on fulfilling that role, as frustrating, as painful as it probably is probably worse to write them off and never talk about them again, which
oh yeah. So, and I mean, challenge parents to take the high road, Well, you might be angry because they think they're right, and it came down to some dispute between them and their young adult. Could be politically, it could be religious, it could be gender related or whatever, and hey, take the high road. You don't stop loving your kids no matter what. If you believe that's an important message, you don't stop that because you disagree with lifestyle or some decision or whatever that they've made. So but it's painful. It's a really painful situation,
yeah,
and parents feel extremely helpless.
yeah.
And they can't force a young adult to have a relationship with them. So
Yeah. Well, Jack, this has been really fascinating conversation. I'd love to continue talking to you for another hour, because there's so much in this transition period from adolescence all the way through really letting go, that is just so filled with all the principles of good parenting and good communication. The skills that you're talking about, the coaching skills that are the same kind of skills that you use for all interpersonal relationship, improve your relationship with your partner, your spouse,
yeah,
with the same kind of tools. So if everybody could get coaching training, I think it'd be a better world. You've got a website, parentslettinggo.com. I know you do therapy. I imagine that's just for Minnesota, but
yeah,
coaching.
because of licensing limitations. I do have a book coming out later in August and September. So if people have an interest in what I'm doing, the website, join my mailing list and you'll get information on that book when it's available. It's called The Launch Code, Loving and Letting Go of Our Adult Children. So
That's
that's
great.
the
And you've got
title.
some other resources there at parentslettinggo.com. I would just advise anybody during this time period, if you're feeling anxious about it, if you're worried about how things are going at even this early stage, that you reach out to somebody like you to at least get a 1 hour conversation about what you should be doing next, how you want to live this experience, because like a lot of things in life, but especially in parenting, bumbling through sometimes works. I mean, it's worked for, millennia, but getting ahead of this kind of thing is very satisfying,
Oh,
very.
absolutely. Absolutely. I don't think you'd ever regret doing something that, intervening kind of early on and trying to understand how you can be a better parent at any stage is going to be invaluable, I think. So
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Jack. I appreciate everybody tuning in. And until next time, Paul Banis of GreatDad.com. Take care.
thank you, Paul.